Welcome to Resolve IBS and IBD Naturally. I'm Courtney Cowie, a nutrition therapy and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. If you are struggling with the symptoms of IBS or IBD and want to get to the root cause of your symptoms so you can take back your health through a whole person approach, this podcast is for you. Just a disclaimer that the information I'm presenting in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. You should always consult a qualified practitioner before making any changes to your health or medical regimen. That being said, let's get on with the show. All right, Kelly Hale, I'm super excited to have you on today. So, you have a very interesting background as an occupational therapist, a movement specialist, and also a brain body expert. And I definitely want to ask you how you got into kind of the brain body stuff with the OT work, right? Because that's not a connection you often see. But first, I just want you to kind of talk a little bit about your background, your story, if you have one, just share who you are with the audience.
Oh, sure. And thanks for having me. I'm honored and delighted to be here. So, I think oftentimes those of us that are passionate about our professions, we have both a personal and a professional journey. As you pointed out, I'm an OT and I actually chose occupational therapy because of the mental health component, even before mental health was really being more talked about in the open. And so I loved that component with also supporting physical healing as well. But what happened was I only lasted 3 years in a traditional rehab setting because it became a factory. I was being told I had to use certain protocols, and even if I sensed that, the shoulder was affecting that pelvic pain, that I wasn't supposed to address them, just stick to a protocol. And I was like, I can't do this. This is so out of alignment with who I am and what I want for the people I serve.
Yeah.
So 3 years after starting in a clinical setting, I opened a holistic multidisciplinary setting. And I was delighted because I had an hour with people instead of 20, 30 minutes, and I didn't have protocols. It could be very holistic. And yet, the people that were coming in were super stressed out. They were disconnected from their bodies. So even though I had an hour, it could take 20, 30 minutes to get them more embodied. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, there's something more to this. So I went back to my developmental training as an OT. We're very much about development, studied those early reflexes and developmental movements. And then I also found something called Brain Gym, GYM, like gymnasium.
Oh,
And I started studying that. That was a 4-year course of study, which I love and I still study and am always learning more in that realm. And that really ties in movement as developing and sustaining brain health, which makes sense, right? Because we started out as babies, the way we develop our brain is learning to be on our tummy, rolling to one side, being on our back, moving through reflexes, and we lay the scaffolding for our nervous system and our brain function. But
yeah.
what happened was I found that it allowed me to take the Pilates repertoire that I am grateful to have deeper because we put it into a flow that honored development. And so I was loving that. And on the personal level, I was finding that I was a 20 something opening a business, overwhelmed, stressed out, and I was living life in fight, flight, freeze. And
Yeah.
I was always out overachiever, high achieving, pushing myself, but it took its toll, right? And I had health challenges. And so I realized through the work of nervous system regulation that I didn't have to live life in fight, flight, freeze, that I could find the ease. And life is so much different now and so much better. And certainly I'll kind of drop back into those old patterns, but I can get myself out of it. Now, at the same time, I have had a lifelong journey of gut challenges. I remember in middle school struggling, couldn't wait to get home, so much cramping and pain, GI issues. And then in middle school, probably around age 11, we were on a family vacation. I had to go to the ER for gut issues.
Oh,
And,
wow.
the doctors were like, oh, just eat more fiber and then it persisted through college, and I was told I had IBS, which made
Mhm.
sense because it was very triggered with stress.
Mhm.
It wasn't until sometime later, post grad school, that I actually discovered that I have celiac.
Wow.
And so finding that out really helped me to get clarity. It helped me deal with my fertility challenges. But even finding that out, my gut was a mess.
Yeah.
So I had to use nervous system regulation in my own practice for myself and for others to bring myself back to that place of calm, groundedness so I could digest and nourish myself. And then, I mean, we can talk about, I also went to study the visceral work. I wanted a different approach to manual therapy because some of the myofascial techniques I learned early on were very direct. And so I found this, and I always felt like the nervous system didn't appreciate that. It would recoil. It was counterproductive. So
Yeah.
then I found integrative manual therapy, which was mostly indirect. There's some direct techniques, but the real hallmark of that style of manual therapy training is that we are trained in organ mobilizations, all external. And of course, my favorite to do is the GI, and I love supporting people with that. And then because there are not a lot of us trained in that, I'm always teaching workshops and digital. I have a membership where I teach people organ exercises. So that's a long answer to your question, but I realized that the brain and the body were so connected, they couldn't be separated. The gut in the brain and the nervous system cannot
Mhm.
be separated
Yeah,
because when we're stressed, we can't digest properly, or we're stressed because digestion is difficult. And then
exactly.
we get into nervous system dysregulation. So there's just so much connection there that I love, love, love helping people discover and then really empowering them with tools, right? So that they
Yeah.
don't always have to be coming in for a session or, again, because I can only serve so many people in my little corner of the world. Let's get these techniques out there. And so I love creating videos and sharing these unique techniques in that way too.
Oh, I love all that, Kelly. And I feel like we have some parallels on our journey, both on the gut health realm. I too, not that I was officially diagnosed with celiac, but I actually discovered this like I carry the genes, like there's a genetic component,
Yes.
and the HLA-DQ 2.5 is kind of homozygous, like 90. I don't know if it's like 95%. Then the other's the DQ8 version. So I did not know any of that for myself either, and GI docs had missed that early on in my journey. So I know exactly what that situation is like, similar to you. Lots
Hmm.
of just ongoing stomach pain challenges just as a kid. And my parents had no idea that there was like potentially a wheat sensitivity component. And
Sure.
also like you kind of entered the holistic health field from a body work interest standpoint and then kind of
Yeah.
blossomed from there. Um, so it sounds like you kind of ended up combining a lot of different things you were exposed to and trained in. Like, did you even mention Pilates? Did I hear you correctly with that?
Yes, I
That
did.
that
So,
is so cool. Yeah.
yeah, so in my studio clinic, I have all the Pilates apparatus. And, I love Pilates. I love movement. I grew up dancing. I've always loved, I mean, I started teaching fitness classes in high school, and I've always loved movement.
Yeah.
And so I really immersed myself in studying Pilates, various types of Pilates. I would say that I've done most of my training in rehab and prehab based Pilates. But
Okay.
I will say, if I'm being fully honest, and some Pilates purists might come for me, but that's okay because I'm
Yeah.
willing to hear their viewpoint too.
Yeah.
I was, people would say, like when I was going through my fertility challenges, oh, you need to do yoga or Pilates or just relax. And I'm like, I love my Pilates, but it doesn't get me out of fight, flight, freeze. And then I would
Right.
notice in the people that I served that some of them would be very relaxed and feeling wonderfully centered and grounded afterwards. And other people were almost more revved up with a kinetic energy that wasn't focused. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking, wait a second. And then I would say to myself, well, maybe Pilates isn't for everybody. But then
Yeah.
I thought, no, because they have sessions where they do seem more integrated and grounded after. And then what I figured out after combining all these studies is that certain movements, developmental movements, are tied to triggers and trauma. So if
Yeah.
we ended the session with those kind of movements, we were kind of leaving them swimming in their sort of their stress, right? Even if they didn't have big T trauma,
Mhm.
little T trauma is very valid as well. But if they were left in their stress, if we didn't end with contralateral cross body movements, then we would be doing a disservice. So now I do have the pleasure of helping to educate other movement and Pilates professionals. And I'm always showing them, yes, move through the movements where the stress lives, like the snow angel type movement, let's say, or something similar to that. But then
Yeah.
always make sure you come back to the cross body movements, do more of those and end with those so that
Yeah.
the movement is so much more purposeful and the movement does truly help to regulate the emotions in the nervous system.
Yeah. So I love this whole topic. And I've actually had a few people on the podcast who have spoken in depth around the mental part of trauma, right? Like, and the whole area is so fascinating to me because we're kind of talking chicken and egg because we know the mind and the body are connected. And there's a whole school of thought in people that are trained very deeply. And this is very valid, right? Like in practices that work with the mind, actually having an influence on the body. So basically creating a new reality from your mind, right? But kind of what you're also subscribing to on the other end is that the body, because it holds these memories and these patterns, we can work with the structure to actually produce a different outcome as well, correct? Like you're basically saying that there's things we can shift from a somatic level.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's so much we could explore there, but if someone is doing I think counseling talk therapy is amazing, but
Yeah.
if they're continually restating it, they're reliving the trauma over and over. And so a lot of the local therapists and even just, because of our virtual world, I will do programs for social workers and counselors to give them simple tools that they can share with their clients and patients in their sessions so that their nervous system is supported. Let's bring them back to midline for safety as they talk about that traumatizing event. And it
Yeah.
goes, there's so much great support out there now, like Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body
Yeah.
Keeps the Score. And it really does. Where is that trauma? And also, where are those emotions?
Yeah.
I've always said in my movement space supporting people, hey, we're here for the emotions. This is a safe space. You might start laughing in a way that feels sort of odd or out of place. You might start crying. We're here for it all. But
Yeah.
certain areas hold certain emotions, like the liver is anger. And if
Yeah.
you're not ever taught or given space, because a lot of us as girls are told, no, you can't be angry, it's not polite, it's not
Yeah.
ladylike, and no one processes that emotion, it's going to hang out in your liver. And
Yeah.
certain parts of your gut tie into the ileocecal valve is tied to complaints. And sometimes I find it's complaints that weren't validated or concerns that weren't ever acknowledged, right? Or maybe someone gets into a pattern where their style, I have a teenager, so sometimes we see this where it's complain, 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 right?
Yeah.
And so then I'm thinking, oh, is that ileocecal valve needing some support? Or maybe the cardiac sphincter where the esophagus drops into the stomach. Maybe there's a lot going on there, and that's the seat of worry. So
Mhm.
there's so many emotions that layer into our gut tissue and into other areas of our body that when we really slow down and take time to acknowledge and move through them and support them, sometimes with hands-on self-soothing techniques, we can find that, oh, we're getting a more comprehensive approach, a more holistic approach to healing our gut, right? And
Yeah.
any other sort of challenge. So it's just, I'm so grateful to bring the mental, the mind, the body, and the gut together because they're so connected.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear you kind of talk about just because it sounds like even in your course of study, you were able to kind of map out these patterns that tend to correlate with these different emotions. And I know too, having studied Chinese medicine, that is, the liver is the organ of anger, as you said. I'm so interested in like in your work with people, do you find that it's a process of trying to assess like where is structure not functioning correctly or tight, and then kind of trying to assess, is there something that's corresponding to this framework that might make sense emotionally? Or is it that you're also kind of doing a bit of a timeline with them and sort of asking, like, have there been any like historical events that you've gone through that have been extremely stressful? Is it kind of like both ends of the spectrum that you're tackling this from?
Yeah, I love that question. I love that you have the background in Chinese medicine. I collaborate with a lot of Chinese medicine practitioners and just love what they bring to the work. And yes, it's some of both.
Yeah.
It's both because what does the body, the mind, and the heart space, as I like to say, in front of me present at that day, at that moment, whether it's in person or virtual? And also, what is the person ready for? Like, let's meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
Someone may not be ready to hear about those emotions or go through the history. They might be willing to go, yeah, I do feel that area on the right side light up when I feel like my partner's complaining a lot or when I feel like I want to complain a lot, for
Mm.
example. But, if I have someone on my table in person, I'm going to hands on do some things to figure out what's a priority, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
do a longitudinal pressure scan and see where it takes me. And oh, it's taking me to the left side of the gut. Okay, maybe we want to look at the sigmoid a little bit more. Maybe we want to support that a little bit more. And
Yeah.
then start working there, see what comes up. And then if the person seems like they're ready, I might give them some tools for emotional support. Say, hey, have you looked at this? Here's something to work on moving through XYZ emotion.
Yeah.
Or, a lot of times, if someone, let's say, is struggling with constipation, I'm going to think about developmental movements that support ease with elimination, pelvic floor, bowel, and bladder. So if maybe then we want to move through spinal parese reflex that they probably moved through and did what they had to do with it or integrated it early in life. But then life, stress, trauma, illness, car accidents happen. And
Yeah.
oh, when we start to explore that movement and do some hands-on, or I teach, my virtual community, my membership, how to do some hands-on for themselves, then
Mhm.
wait a second. Oh my goodness, they are finding the ease with elimination, as I like to say. You
Yeah.
know, um, so it really kind of ebbs and flows and in terms of what that person needs. And a lot of times it can be as simple as, again, because not everyone can find a visceral manual therapist that's going to do
Yeah.
hands-on work, hard to find. So
Yeah.
a lot of times it's teaching people organ release exercises.
Yeah.
Like in any given session with my virtual community, I might be teaching, let's release the liver with these, and it's just postural. There's these exercises where we look down, we look up. It feels very strange, and we
Yeah.
hold it for a release, but it's going to release. If we do one, let's say for the jejunum, we're going to find that we have release of spasms, we have balanced muscle tone, or tone of the organs, so visceral tone. So it's combining little things that, and again, people are so busy and overwhelmed. I'm always saying, here's a 10-minute version, here's a 40-minute versions for you when you
Right.
have time to drop in. But there's also 30-minute versions. How can we move in a way that honors our brain, body, and biome? That's always what it's about for me. I'm always thinking, how do they interconnect? How can we support the ease for this person?
Yeah, 100%. And I love that you like offer the flexibility. I also try to do that in my work because it's like the reality that even in a busy life, like day by day, it can look very different, right? And I think the biggest thing is just as long as you're doing a little bit of something every day, and on the days you have more time, great, like do a little bit more and it'll have a compounding effect. But I think that can sometimes for like the all or nothing types, they get in their head a little bit and be like, well, I'm not gonna, and I'm sure just
Yes,
like a lot of these paths, this can take some time too for the effects to start to like result in a way that they're like, "Oh, I'm feeling a difference." And that's just always the conversation we have to have with people is like, trust the process, right? Like,
right,
don't discount the 10 minutes you have to put towards, working on the liver,
right.
ileocecal valve, whatever it is, right?
Exactly. And there's the time piece, but then sometimes too, the why, the motivation,
Yeah.
the why. Do they want to be able to travel? Do they want to engage with their children or grandchildren? Or sometimes I've seen this in my 25 plus years as a practitioner, pain and dysfunction is an amazing motivator.
Yeah.
Someone's like, I want to be out of pain. I want to stop white knuckling it to get home because I need to find a bathroom, or, the urgency, or if they're more on the challenges with dealing with some IBS types of situations, or feeling that they're constantly dealing with the heaviness of constipation. So that pain and suffering is sometimes a great motivator. And they're like, okay, I didn't think I could make time, but now my body, brain, and biome is telling me I have to make time. So
Yeah.
sometimes that's when we get a little more committed. And then that's when I'll have a conversation about, okay, you did 20 minutes because you were really suffering and you did 20 minutes regularly. Now let's talk about what's realistic for you and how can you make it part of your day. Like I work with a lot of busy moms
Mhm.
And I'll say, you know what? When the water's boiling on the stove, you're making whatever, go ahead and let's do that exercise for the cardiac sphincter, or go ahead and do the ileum release because you've got a few minutes waiting for that, or you're
Yeah.
sitting in the car at carpool or, car line pickup and, oh, just do a few minutes of that neurofascial processing to put the ease into the sigmoid.
Right.
So it's, but they're like, "Oh, I never realized I could do that." And it's almost like they need a permission slip, right? Like, "Oh,
Right.
I can do that." So, because it's hard to take time for ourselves.
Well, it totally is. And I think that sometimes it's like this is the beauty of working with somebody who's more objective than you can be with yourself, right? Like it's like every coach
Yeah,
needs a coach, every practitioner needs a
exactly.
practitioner. And like we could
Exactly.
know all the things, but there's just something beautiful about having someone like mirror back to you, like, wait a minute though, like you just told me you've got this amount of time. And as you say all that, Kelly, like another thing that I think of is like truly, it's not about not having time. Like we all have 24 hours in a day. It's what we're really prioritizing to do with that time, whether we like to admit it or not, right? Like
Yes.
most of us have some decompressive, end of the day stress, like let me just like brain dead, do this thing, watch Netflix, whatever it is. And I'm
Yes.
not saying that's a bad thing, but when you're in that critical point in life and you're in a lot of pain because of a health issue, sooner or later you have to take a look at how you're spending your time, and that pattern has contributed to you getting unwell. So to shift that, you have to shift the pattern of how you're living, which includes in this case, right, doing these exercises to try to improve function of the organs. So,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. And that goes in alignment with what I often say because people will say, "Well, how long do you think it'll be before it gets better?" And I'll say, "Well, how long did it take for you to get here?" You
Right.
know? And even though like I'm thinking of my own journey, when I found out I had celiac, I was relieved. My friends were like, "Oh no, that's horrible." I'm like, "No, I can manage this. This is lifestyle management." Right?
Mhm.
And being aware of its autoimmune component and whatnot. But it wasn't as if all of a sudden I took gluten out and I was a picture of health. It
Right, no.
was taking gluten out and then making sure for cross contamination and whatnot, but also making sure to take the time to slow down and heal my gut from the inside
Right,
out. And
right.
that takes time. And so, and I'll tell people that in 20, 30 years ago, it took less time because we weren't living in as toxic of an environment. And I don't
Right.
mean only, what's out there in the world chemically, but also all of the overwhelming, being over inundated with technology, for example.
Yes.
So there's all these different ways that we have to set ourselves up for realizing that it's a long game. It's not going to
Mhm.
be quick and fast.
Yeah. No, I'm so with you, and I'm so glad you circled back to that story about figuring out you're a celiac and healing the gut. I literally, when you were telling that, I was thinking just the other day, I have a little Facebook group that I manage too, and a woman popped in and she's like, "I'm trying to do leaky gut, and I'm also trying to chelate metals right now. Any suggestions?" And I'm thinking to myself, like,
Whoa!
"Oh gosh, like." The thing is, like, everybody wants the silver bullet supplement they can take, right? And that was immediately it was, like, so obvious to me. I'm like, "This is not the right approach to this issue." And as
Yes.
big of a bit buzzword as leaky gut is, what a lot of people don't realize is, like, healing it is a process. And you hit the nail
Yes.
on the head when you said, if you aren't regulating the nervous system, I don't care if it's leaky gut, restoring good stomach acid, restoring good pancreatic enzyme production, like the whole 9 yards. Like your digestive system is not going to optimally function if
Right.
your body is literally frozen in some sort of stress response. And people just
Exactly.
don't know that, Kelly. Like it still amazes me how people don't understand that. And they just think reaching for a supplement and going on a wheat-free diet is going to be enough to fix all this. And it's like, I'm sorry to say, but no, it's not that
Right.
easy, right?
Right. And, that's such a good point. And I do really appreciate and I'm grateful that the term nervous system regulation is becoming more of a household word
Yeah.
and phrase and curiosity. I'm always about being curious, but I also think it's being overused. Like people will say, oh, just do some deep breathing. And if you ask someone who's in fight flight and even freeze
Mhm.
to start some breathing exercises, they can become more agitated. they may
Yeah.
not get calm. And so then we have to look at certain developmental moves to do first so that breath is more accessible and is truly calming. But,
Yes.
if someone's wanting to seal and heal their gut and yet they're in fight, flight, freeze, we know that stress is going to prevent the gut tissue, that mucosal lining, from actually being able to seal and heal itself. And
Yes. Yes.
so and sometimes people have to hear it as, what's your stress level? How are you managing your stress? Maybe they don't quite realize the nervous system component, but okay, then here are some stress management tools maybe you haven't explored from the nervous system and emotional regulation realm.
Yeah.
So it's amazing because people do want that silver bullet and they want the quick fix, and some people don't want to do the work. And honestly, then I say, what have you ever achieved in life that was meaningful and significant that didn't require some hard work, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
we got to go back to the basics of, life there, life 101.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I don't care if we're talking about trying to correct things that are not functioning well from a soft tissue or organ standpoint in the body, or we're talking about getting back to basics and cooking real food in your own kitchen, right? Like, I think part of the unfortunate consequence of our modern day technology filled lifestyles is everything is a push of a button, right? Like, we have a remote to turn the TV on. Like, you can
Yes, yes.
instantly go on Amazon and buy whatever. Like, malls are disappearing. I mean, just the sheer need to go places to get things
Mhm,
done or to pick things up is
mhm.
starting to become like obsolete more and more. And I think unfortunately it's creating more of this like blase sort of for lack of a better word like lazy mindset, and that's where we have to be very careful, I think, as we trend into the future, having a certain amount of like discipline and drive and commitment to whatever it is. A healthy lifestyle, hopefully for most people listening, would be a big one. That's a really good thing. And it not only develops your character, but I think it really keeps all the cylinders firing, full on so that your brain and body stay healthier for the whole
Yes.
of your life. Because one of the biggest things I hear from my aging clients is like they worry about in retirement, like their brain's getting kind of like, not as sharp.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course the body too, but I just think sometimes we forget about that, and younger people don't think like that when they're younger, but I think it's a reality as our metabolic health is getting worse because of all of these different changes with the modern world. I think our brain health is going right down the tube with it. Are you struggling with chronic diarrhea or constipation and have been told by your doctor that there's either nothing wrong or that you're going to need to take a med for the rest of your life to control symptoms? What if there was another way? A way that empowered you to take back your health through a smart nutritional strategy and through running the right testing to identify true root causes. If you are ready to say yes to self empowerment and to starting the journey to real improvement in your gut health, click the link to grab my free e guide.
Absolutely. And I love the point you bring up. It's so important to think about, we are becoming more and more isolated because we can push a button and get whatever we need. And yeah, it's convenient sometimes, but what about the sensory experience? What about going to the market? Like, when we had to sometimes order our groceries during COVID and whatnot, I was like, I want to touch my produce. I'm very picky. If I'm going to invest in my wonderful organic produce, I want to pick just the right apple, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
I also want to smell. Like I want to, if I don't have my herbs that are available at home and I need to buy fresh herbs, I want to pick it up and smell it. Okay, this is the fragrance I remember. Takes me
Yeah.
back to an experience with a certain food, and then I might be inspired to make something new because of something that's at, I love the farmers markets, and
Yeah.
maybe something there I'm going to, oh, make something because of that. And for the older population, they need that stimulation of being out there and having, there's, everyone needs it, not just the older population, but
Yeah.
getting out there and having community.
Right.
Farmers markets, I love going to different ones because I love seeing the same people over and over and be like, oh yeah, my nickname is Kelly Kale because I love to grow kale and turn it into kale chips. And it's a funny story how it started. But anyway, so I, like, one time I was buying kale at the farmer's market and someone I knew saw me, they're like, why are you buying kale? Don't you grow your own kale? And I'm like, I do, but the animals got a hold of it, and it wasn't even the deer, it was my dog Snoopy. I
Oh,
have this
funny.
dog that loves plant-based food, and we have stand-up garden beds, and he was on his hind legs just chowing down. I had 4 different varieties of kale, and he ate it all. So I had to go buy, but people were kind of shocked because they know me as growing a lot of kale. And I was like, yep, I got to buy my kale. But it struck up this fun connection and sense of community. And you get to know your farmers. And
Absolutely.
even like our local markets, I try to shop at the smaller ones, but you get to know who's in the different departments. And if we just order up our groceries, we're not going to have, and I'm not going to see, like, I just finally found a sprouted gluten-free bread. I used to, back in the day, love the Ezekiel sprouted bread, and I
Yeah.
still craved it, but I couldn't find a gluten-free one. And I also didn't want one with a lot of fillers. And I finally found one because I was taking my time going through the market. I didn't have time for it, but I mean, my husband says when we go out of town, I find all the health food stores and I go there like an amusement park. Like, what's
Yeah.
your now? Because they might have something in that city that we don't have, and then I got to ask our market to get it. So we need to slow down and experience our food, find inspiration in our food, and support our senses, because our nervous system needs a sensory experience.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, and I love that you bring that up because I know that's an area that you're definitely trained in occupational therapy. And sometimes I even forget that from my body work, background. And I was just like laughing because I'm like, we're cut from the same cloth, Kelly. Like we went on a trip as a family with my mom and my brother's family, like in Milwaukee. This was probably 4 months ago. And we had some flexibility, and the first thing I wanted to do was go to, like, their big co-op down there. I'm like, "Yes, let's go
Yes.
see what they have."
Yes.
Like,
Oh my gosh. Imagine the fun we could have.
oh,
Went on like
yeah.
a field trip to going to the stores together, and
Oh,
we'd probably
yeah, and
find a
then
little trouble too, but yeah.
oh, for sure, and I mean, I can easily spend 2 hours, like, slowly walking, and meanwhile, my kids are throwing tantrums and like, "I
Yeah.
wanna get out of here," it's like but it's so funny, and I think it's just a testament to, like, part of just living life isn't it doesn't have to be big and flashy and overstimulating. And I think with like the modern diet, right? Like we've got such hyper palatability and all these additives and like flavor
Oh, it's
enhancers
so
in food.
scary.
Yeah, which are
Yeah.
so bad for you. But I think again, kind of back to that brain body connection, it's so stimulating on both fronts. It's so toxic for the body that people almost have to go through like a bit of a detox, like on all levels when they're
Yes.
making these changes to whole foods. And then on top of that, it's kind of getting the brain to tap better into reality and just appreciate the here and now and be able to find curiosity and adventure in simple things like in the summer strolling through the farmers market, or what's a new little co-op I maybe haven't explored in my community, or whatever it might be, maybe just a farm visit, like you meet a farmer and they have like every so often these open tours and you can go see how they care for the animals. That would be really fun to do with kids even, right? Like
Right.
there's so many things that I think people have like we as a society have just gotten away from, and it seems kind of like dull maybe by comparison to all of the high stimulation that we have for entertainment nowadays. And I mean, some of that is okay, but I think it's just there's been a shift, right? And as a mom kind of trending Gen X, right? I remember the days before cell phones, like
Oh
looking
yeah.
at my kids in that generation, I'm like, "Oh god, like where are things gonna be like 30, 40 years from now?" Right?
Yeah, it can strike a bit of fear and dysregulate our nervous systems to think about it, but
Yeah.
absolutely. I think it definitely is concerning that you do have, to your point about if someone is used to the standard American diet, they
Yeah.
do have to sort of wean themselves off of it. And there can be addictive properties, as you know.
Yeah.
But what I have found is that unless you address the nervous system piece, and unless you address, again, I'm going to go back to that cardiac sphincter and certain areas of the stomach, it's
Yeah.
going to be really hard to move beyond that hyperpalatability and that addiction sense. So
Yeah.
that's where I support a lot of people with that piece. Like they're going to work with someone like you
Yeah.
for that nutritional expertise. And then I'm saying, let's bring in the brain body piece that supports the biome.
Yeah.
Because if they just try to, white knuckle it through and they just try to muscle through getting off of some of those foods, they might get into a deprivation backlash. And then
Yeah.
we're going to say, let's work with the nervous system so it feels safe, it feels nurtured, so that there isn't as much of the deprivation backlash, right?
Yeah, and I'm so curious about your experience and your training around approaching both nervous system dysregulation, but also releasing trauma stored in the body's organs and tissues from like an exercise and a touch like somatic perspective. Have you found that that alone can get people most of the way there, or have you found that people can get pretty far with that, but then they also have to work with like the thought patterns and maybe some of the limiting beliefs and like the mental piece of the picture as well?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I'm gonna say I've seen some of both. It
Okay.
depends. I'll get some people that come to me that they've done a lot of talk therapy and they didn't feel like they were making progress. Now, all due respect, I have many colleagues and friends that are excellent mental health therapists, excuse me, and
Yeah.
they're doing great work, but sometimes someone's not able to get past it, and so they'll be referred to me. And it's the piece that helps them really go deep enough to release it
Yep.
and not to only release it, but to reintegrate. It's not as if you're going to forget the trauma, but you're
Yep.
going to be able to move through the trauma, even when it's triggered again, right? Because
Okay.
and that's the whole idea. We're moving through it. Like recently in my membership, every month we do a repatterning, a nervous system repatterning. And recently we did one around grief because
Oh,
I know the members well, and a few of them had loss and different types of loss, not always loss of a loved one, that's horrible, but
yeah.
also loss of a role or loss of something that was supposed to come through for them, whether it's
Right.
professionally or whatnot. And so we were moving through grief as a group. And later, some of the people were sharing afterwards, like, oh my gosh, I had so much old grief come up that I realized I hadn't processed because
Yeah.
they weren't supported. And of course, it was being triggered by a new experience, but
Yeah.
now they had tools for it. And then
Yeah.
some people say, I don't have any interest in doing the talk therapy. And they come right into this because, I
Yeah.
just said some people will do a lot of that and then they come to this. And some people, are really in tune and they want to do both. They're like, I need to do both the somatic movement based therapies
Yeah.
and also have the ability to talk through it. So
Yeah.
it's really going to be, a personal preference.
Okay.
Um, and also what someone has access to, right?
Yeah.
Because I know like during COVID, no one could find therapists. Everybody was like
Yeah.
waitlisted. So I had a lot of people coming in and saying, I'm going to also add therapy in of, kind of talk therapy, but I want to start with something. And they knew they could get this work going virtually. And then when they could get in for a talk therapy session, they added it in. So
Yeah.
I think it's very individual, but I also think it is something that someone kind of moves through. Someone might do either therapy for a while. My hope is that they do the movement based therapies always and
Yeah.
then, but maybe they don't always do it with sessions or guidance or the membership. They take the tools they've learned and they run with it. That's my goal, is to empower them. And
Yeah.
someone might do, say I've done 10 years of talk therapy and then decide I'm ready to explore this. And then maybe at some point they have something they want to go back to and look with their mental health therapist a little bit
Yeah.
deeper with, because now they've done the movement based work, right?
Yeah.
So it just it just depends. I think every situation and every season of life is going to require a different, sort of um, plan, if you will. And I like to ask the body. I mean, I'm doing muscle testing to ask the body, what does it need right now? And then we have all these different options,
Yeah.
and every day, if I'm working with someone in person and I cognitively think, oh, I really sense that they could use this. But then I ask their body and muscle test, and they needed something different. And we're going to go with that because the body is so wise, right? The body,
Yeah.
mind, and I always say the body, mind, and heart space, because when we're tuning into those, and I like to empower people in my virtual sessions to learn, how can you check in if you're not sure which direction to go? How can you
Mm.
tune in? There's certain motilities they can start to feel,
Yeah.
all sorts of tools that they can become empowered with.
Oh, I 100% agree. And I feel like even just if nothing else, if people start to get much more in tune with body consciousness, it's amazing when I've asked various people just in different circumstances, like if you were to stop what you're doing and just in a moment be able to get clear on what your body is feeling emotionally, it's a struggle for a lot of people because so much of just our culture doesn't allow for us when we experience stress to process it right then and there. So as a survival mechanism, we have to develop these adaptations that it's protective in a sense, right? Because it keeps us functioning and going. But it's almost like this I'll deal with this later. I'll deal with this later. And
Right.
I think kind of also just to support how important the work you do and the body component of this is, like even in the mental health space, so many therapists are now going and getting trained in things like brain spotting or EMDR, these other
Yes.
sort of
Yes.
therapies that if you look at what is it based on, it's like brain spotting is eye position, right? Tracking where like somatically that memory lives, in conjunction with this like eye position and trying
Yes.
to release it from these actual like movements or postures that you're working with the body at the time you're doing the therapy. And it's like, yeah, that just makes so much sense. And I think, as you said, the body's the record of all of our emotional experiences. And I think this kind of leads to another question that I'm so curious to ask you, which is, and I don't have a great answer to this either, Kelly, because I know clients will ask me on the bodywork table, like, well, how long is it going to take for this like shoulder tension to go in? I'm like, I don't know as long as it takes, but like my thinking is like, have you found that if people work with exercises and somatic techniques repetitively enough, they can pretty fully release some of these very long held patterns? Or is it more a process where they can release it and they have to keep working on it over time to kind of maintain some of that? Does that question make sense?
I think so. Yeah. So, like, is there a point where they're kind of complete and they can take a break from the work, or do they constantly need to work on it? Is that
Yeah,
what you're asking?
exactly. Yeah, and then more even from like, let's say there's this intuitive sense, we'll just use like, I don't know, the right side of the abdomen, I'm just making this up, right? Is like there's some tension and discomfort there. And after several weeks of working, they're like, I think this might be tied to like frustration I'm holding on to. Like, do you feel like through working with the body can somatically release and let go of that emotion and then kind of fully process it? Or is it something that you find they have to keep working on because they might still be having thoughts that are ongoing that are re-triggering the frustration? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So the thing is that I do feel that there can be some sense of completion for a lot of people. It depends on how much trauma. Like if there's a lot of past trauma, really deep trauma,
Yeah.
then it may be difficult to get to a full completion. It might be more of a complete release. I mean, it might be more of learning to manage it. But even
Okay.
if someone has a completion around something, they're going to potentially be triggered in the future with events that happen. However, if they've built the resiliency and the reserves of their nervous system, the trigger will be less jolting to them and less likely to throw them off of their ability to function and not be thrown back down the loop with it. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think that, for example, I'll have people that have been in the membership, they've done a lot of the work in the Gutsy Brain membership, and they feel really good. And then they're like, I'm going to be traveling for a while, and they'll take a break, which is great. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was going to be triggered because I got into this cycle XYZ when I was traveling. So I need to get back to the work. And I'm like, that's great. Do you want any suggestions on one or two or three things you can start with? And I say it's great because their awareness, like for years, they
Yeah.
would just spiral and not be aware that they had to go back to some of these tools of
Right.
nervous system regulation. So I think that we're going to do the work to try and make something less of an issue that we run into or self-sabotage, but then we're always going to have to keep checking in. Is this triggering something? Is this related to something from before? Oh, yes, this is a pattern I'm
Yeah.
noticing in myself. What can I do to support that? Maybe I need to move and do the fear paralysis reflex exercise.
Mhm.
Maybe I need to move through the Moro. Those two are very tied to fight, flight, freeze because it really revved them up, so to speak.
Yeah.
And sometimes they won't even know why, or they won't know that it's tied to that, but they just know that they feel very triggered. So
Yeah.
then, even if they don't know that it was related to that area of healing that was mostly complete or they were feeling complete around, even if they don't know that, but they just start supporting their nervous system and getting out of fight, flight, freeze, it's going to help them. Because that's the thing. A lot of people are like, well, I don't know what to do when. And I'm like, here's your top three. When you feel frustrated, angry, triggered, when you feel that amygdala is taking over, we're reacting,
Yeah.
then here's, three simple exercises that will always help you get out of that really intense state.
Yeah.
So I think that, yeah, I mean, and the cool thing is this is all within us. I have all the wonderful Pilates apparatus and have access to all that. It's great. I love it, but
Yeah.
you don't have to have that. You can use your hands on your body for certain self-soothing techniques. You can also move in ways that are very simple. Even people that have joint challenges or other challenges that make getting onto the floor difficult. They can do things seated, they can do things lying on their sofa.
Yeah.
So I love that it's just innately within us. I actually have a program called Within because it's all about what is within us and it's right there. All we need is a tour guide
Yeah.
to get us there. And I'm super honored to be the tour guide for people because when they feel it and they realize it, they're like, wow, this is so easy. And I'm like, yes, it's so easy and accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people are really hungry for this type of modality nowadays, right? It's all about self-empowerment. And just what I'm seeing is more and more people are like, I don't want to go to my doctor and be recommended drugs anymore, and there's still,
Yeah.
I think, a majority kind of default knee jerk that has to be broken there, because there's still quite a few people I talk to that is their first initial go-to. But as more of us kind of get out in the space and teach people, like, you have so much you can though control, right? Like, there's so
Yeah.
much with the right knowledge and skills, you have a lot of power to tap into what you really need, and your body is your best feedback mechanism. It's not broken because you've got these symptoms. It's got these symptoms because it's trying to communicate something to you. And
Right.
it's not an easy language to understand, but whatever approach or approaches people take, I think it's all about just tapping into that greater sense of awareness. And, I just really feel like, even with the somatic stuff, like what you're describing, I've got to imagine that people, especially the first several weeks or months they're working with those techniques, they're probably releasing a lot of old stuff. And it's almost like a bathtub overflowing. And then you kind of bring the water level down, and you might have to keep doing the work to keep the water level at an acceptable place. But it'll never be probably as intense or done unless there's a major stressor that probably comes through.
Yeah.
But yeah, because you don't know what you don't know till you start working with all that stored
Right.
stuff in the body, right?
Right. And that's such a great analogy. It's, that saying I love, no one ever has it all together. It's like trying to eat once and for all.
Yeah,
I mean, we constantly have to be nourishing our brain, our body, and our biome. I mean, it's a constant practice to regulate our nervous system
yeah,
because there's so many. And I always say I share nervous system regulation tools for a highly dysregulated world. I
yeah,
mean, the amount of information coming at people, the intensity that they could be exposed to if they so choose, it's a lot. And so our nervous systems weren't really designed to be in this sort of overstimulating environment. And so, we talk about kids getting overstimulated, but why don't we talk about adults who get into overstimulation? Because it's
yeah,
happening a ton. And how are those adults supposed to help care for young children if they themselves are overstimulated? So
right.
I always feel like just a couple of quick tools can really help someone start to learn how to work with their nervous system, and they're going to be able to have an easier time navigating through life wherever life takes them.
Yeah, no, 100%. I couldn't agree more. In fact, I would almost go so far as to say, like, if an ill person isn't addressing the nervous system, I don't care how clean the diet is, I don't care how
Mhm.
much sleep you get, like,
Mm.
that's a big gap, like, in the whole like, I don't even know if without that, a person could fully get well. Like, that's just kind of been my experience with it, right?
Absolutely. And the thing is, you look at a lot of different health situations, chronic diagnoses. fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and other autoimmune situations.
Yeah,
And there is very often it can be traced back to a nervous system dysregulation that
totally.
had been ongoing. And so many people, I think healthcare is coming along. Now, granted, I'm kind of spoiled because I'm around more holistic minded healthcare providers that I refer people to, they refer people to me. So we're thinking about it differently. But I think the average person is becoming more savvy to that, or they're just becoming fed up because traditional healthcare isn't addressing that part. And thankfully, things like mental health care is becoming much more of an open discussion than behind closed doors. And in the
Yes.
mental health realm, as you talked about, there's so much more exploration of bringing in the other tools like the EMDR and
Yes.
whatnot, because when we're under severe stress, we get into eye lock. It can be to the side because the saber-toothed tiger's coming, but
Yeah.
when the saber-toothed tiger leaves, we're still stuck in the periphery. We see that a lot. Or just being on screens all day, our eyes get stuck in a forward position. And that eye lock is part of nervous system distress. So I love to teach super simple exercises for the eyes that we usually do with movement, but sometimes we have to start with just eyes, just movement, and then we layer them together because we don't want to overwhelm that nervous system. We have to really look at where it's at and what it's ready for.
For sure, for sure. And I think even early on in this conversation, you kind of mentioned that sometimes if you're using a more heavy-handed technique to try to push the nervous system, it doesn't respond very well. And that has been my experience as a body worker. Like sometimes people are just like,
Yes,
just go in there and get at, get at it. And I'm like, well, yeah, I can, but you do realize like there's a push-pull here and your body is holding on to something. And it's probably going to take some nudging and some coaxing and some like getting this to relax and there's a letting go. I mean, I don't have that deep of conversation typically with just bodywork clients, but
right,
like there's not it's not just a physical issue where it's like, go in and fight it, like and I
right,
think that's so fascinating because it's often the subtle support techniques that are the most profound. And sometimes the person maybe experiencing that isn't even aware that there's something
right,
going
right.
on there, right?
Absolutely. That's such a good point. And in addition to doing hands-on work, I one of the tools I use are the small myofascial balls. And we do organ work, we do soft tissue work, we do stability work with it. And when we're using that, we'll go into a spot and I'm like, no, we're gonna wait here. I know you want to get going. I know you want to roll across and feel a greater release because we're all anxious to do that and we're all somewhat impatient because we're human. But I'll
Yeah.
say, we're pausing here because we need to let the body know that we have come in peace.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it might feel like, whether it's someone doing hands-on work manually for someone
Mhm.
else, or they're using the small ball, myofascial ball in themselves, the body might feel a threat. So we're just going to pause and breathe and sink in and be present and be aware because we're sending the body and the mind a message that we have come in peace. And so they
Yeah.
always kind of giggle at that, but they'll say, yeah, right. We've come in peace. We're not here to stir up trouble. We are here to bring peace and calm and length and ease and get that proprioceptive input because the nervous system thrives with that. Get that into the system as well. So, yeah, that's so important.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Kelly, is there anything else that you want to mention before we start to close out our conversation? This has been so fascinating. I've really enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed it too. I mean, I think my biggest hope and wish is for people to stay curious about how their brain, body, and biome is connected
Yeah.
and, learning simple tools. And I do have tools available in my inner peace. They can learn the fear paralysis tool, they can learn a hands on tool. So that's one place that they can start to take that curiosity and say, how can I support myself? And I think too, your body is so wise and
Mhm.
if you do nothing else, if you're like, I'm not ready to learn a tool or nervous system regulation, but if you just start to acknowledge that your body and mind and your gut are so wise and just start to listen and notice, there's a real art form to noticing. What is my body trying to tell me? And I always like to say our bodies whisper long before they scream at us, screaming being pain, right?
Yeah.
So, how can we tune in and really check in and know what it is that we need to do for ourselves because we do know a lot about what we need.
Yeah, and I think what you offer is quite unique. I can't say I've met a lot of people that also have the combination of skills you have and are very interested in the visceral piece of it, right? Like working with
Yeah.
the organs and then also the nervous system kind of tied into that. For people listening who are interested in connecting with you, what would be the best way?
Yeah, so I have a couple of ways. I have a Facebook group where every week I go live with brain-body-biome inspo, and people submit questions and that turns into the topic. They're usually 10 to 15 minutes. Every week I share a tip or a tool and people can use those. They're all curated under guides. If someone doesn't want to be in a group like that, completely understandable, they can get my inner peace, nervous system relief for stress and anxiety. And down the road, I have the Gutsy Brain Movement membership, which is where we do the repatterning, we do the gut organ exercises, all of that. So there's lots of different ways. And then I'm on Instagram, inspired the number two wellness. I think, yeah, wellness. My website's inspired well, but
Yeah.
it's inspired to the number wellness. And I make lots of videos and share lots of content just because I want to get the stuff out there. And I have a vlog and a YouTube channel. So there's lots of ways to get the content, start to get that curiosity supported, and
Yeah.
have tools to help yourself.
Okay, perfect. And I'll be sure to link all your resources in the show notes so that'll be easy for people to find. Well, this has been such an amazing conversation. I've enjoyed it. The body worker in me has really enjoyed getting that feed a little bit too. So I so appreciate having you come on, Kelly.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Did you find this episode informative and helpful? I'd love to have you leave me a 5-star rating. Do you have questions about holistic approaches to optimizing gut health that you'd like to ask? Please leave your question or comment below, and I will be sure to address it personally or cover it in a future episode. Be sure to check the show notes for any resources mentioned in today's episode. See you next time.